Hi everyone, welcome to the All Inclusive podcast, where each week I chat with industry experts and diversity, equity and inclusion executives from the world's leading global brands who share their knowledge, experience and actionable takeaways to help inclusive employers create cultures of belonging where everyone can thrive. Today, I've got the pleasure of being joined by Neil Griffiths. He is the global head of diversity, equality and inclusion at ERM. Welcome, Neil.
Thanks for having me, Natasha. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's kick off with telling our listeners a bit about you and your journey to where you are today.
Sure. So I spent the early part of my career in communication and PR roles, actually. And so through that, I became an accredited business communicator. I'm a chartered PR practitioner, a fellow of the International Association of Business Communicators. So a fairly sort of seasoned history in the comms and PR space. And I've been at my current company, ERM, for about 8.5 years. And it was here that I moved into DE&I work. I started off as in the communication team at ERM, but took on the global mandate for DE&I in 2019. I'm married. My husband and I have 2 kids, both of which we adopted at birth. I've lived and worked across 3 continents, and I've spent my life really sort of drifting in and out of majority and minority groups. There's a great quote that I heard a while back that identity is situational, and I feel like that's been quite a good description of my journey on DE&I, because whether that's being in a linguistic minority or a otherwise kind of cultural minority as part of that experience living and working in different parts of the world, I feel like I bring a lot of that into the work that I do. And again, someone who's first generation university educated, coming from a sort of a very different background than a lot of people who are working in DE&I, sort of bringing a lot of that perspective into the program at ERM and into the work that I do.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Well, I'm interested to know, because you've touched on saying that you've come from a communications and PR kind of background initially, yep. And now you've moved into DEI. How has your kind of previous roles within communications helped you with your current role now?
It's an interesting one, I think, because it's clearly not the same role, right? That's probably an understatement, but I feel like having a background in communication actually sets you up quite well for DE&I work, and there's a number of reasons for that, really. But chief among them is the fact that communication, in my view, is a huge part of DE&I. There's the adage that it's about the journey, not the destination. And I think oftentimes with DE&I work, the journey is what matters more, in fact, to a lot of people, versus, have you arrived at a certain point? And the communication process around that journey is really important. So whether that's, helping people understand what you've put in place on various measures, whether that's gender representation, ethnicity in the organization. I don't think that stakeholders are necessarily expecting you to be there tomorrow, but if you're letting them know the progress that you're making over time, I think that sort of stakeholder engagement, that communication process is really important. So having that as a sort of a way of working, I think is a really it's a really helpful background to have, I think. And also that sort of stakeholder understanding, that stakeholder engagement, being able to think about who's impacted by this work and how are they impacted, and what does that mean for the program? What does that mean for the way that we go about implementing DE&I related initiatives? So that sort of stakeholder analysis, stakeholder understanding and engagement, which is a core competency as a communicator, I think that also helps with the DE&I work. And I would say finally, probably, one of the helpful things is that, like DE&I for many organizations, communicators have had to make the case for investment in good communication, great communication across organizations. So having sort of lived that experience in my comms roles, I think it's sort of helped me just be realistic, I guess, about where the organization is and how to get it on the organizational radar and the strategies there. I think I suppose there's a how do you make it successful for the organization view of that, but also personally, not taking the setbacks too much to heart, because I guess I've been conditioned by my experience in the communication space.
It's said time and time again, I think, with DEI, there's a lot to do, and whilst we've got to a stage where we can see that the business case has already been made, so the research is there's still a lot more that could be done, I think, with regards to like the numbers and the stats and things, but there is enough to kind of show to key stakeholders that this is going to make a difference. But
yeah,
it's one thing showing people figures, it's another thing kind of putting your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. So and we're human beings, so when you get that no, I feel like it's always going to hit hard.
Yeah,
but
for sure,
sometimes if you can build up a thick skin, which it sounds like from what you've experienced through your previous roles within comms and PR, you've kind of built that up a little bit. So you've got a bit of an intolerance to some of those no's. And actually you can probably objection handle a little bit more as well. So you can kind of cut through some of those initials, I'm not too sure, to actually turning it around to, this is totally something that we need to do, and we're quite happy to back you in it.
Yeah, that's totally it. That tenacity point is really important, I think.
So from your experience, what steps do you think organizations should be taking in order to achieve diverse, equitable and inclusive workspaces?
Oh, golly, have we got all day? I suppose everybody says that. I'll talk about it in the way that we've tackled it at ERM. Because we were definitely one of the organizations 6 or 7 years ago that were perhaps almost singularly focused on issues. For us, we're an organization that started with gender and gender representation. We're obviously in the STEM environment, in the kind of work that we do at ERM in environmental and safety consulting. And so the gender challenge has been there for quite some time. When we really got serious about DE&I back in 2017-18, one of the early things that we did was to take an organization-wide view of DE&I. So moving away from those sort of single issues and thinking about how this cuts across the entire organization. We discovered what was then called the Global Diversity and Inclusion Benchmarks model, which is now Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Benchmarks model. And it's been a really useful framework for us to demonstrate how DE&I filters into everything, whether that's just overall leadership and leadership capability, into very specific things like recruitment, benefits and flexible working, through big topics like communication and learning, and then through more sort of external facing aspects like supplier diversity and marketing and service development. And it's just enabled us to have a real different kind of conversation. So instead of it being, how are we going to get more of this kind of person, it's been about what do we need to do in the way that we operate? What do we need to change in the way that we go about our work? And what kind of things do we need to be considering as we are taking things to market? Just change the nature of the conversation entirely. And I think obviously it's going to be very different depending on the kind of organization you are, but just having a sense of how it filters into the way of working, I think is really a critical success factor.
Yeah, it makes sense though, doesn't it? I think because when people think DEI, a lot of people think people, obviously, and how can we create this workspace for the people that are working here? How can we gain that talent? But I think sometimes not enough thought is going into kind of the actual operation of the business as a whole,
hmm
not just its
hmm
employees, but actually in every single department. Like, where does DEI sit with in the way in which we function, how are we servicing our customers? It all plays a critical part in the overall makeup of creating that workspace.
Yep.
So I totally agree with that. I think that sounds interesting. For you, what was one of the challenges though in doing that? Because you've got a big business. ERM is a big company.
It's
So
big.
how do
Yeah.
you feel, how do you touch all of these different parts?
I think that that's actually it. It was the scale, I think. And I know there's organizations that are much larger than we are, but I think it was just, how do we elevate this as a global conversation and getting everybody sort of on board with it? And I would say shifting that conversation from diversity and representation towards inclusion was actually a critical factor in that, and we did that very early on. You know, it's Janet Stovall who famously says that, you know, diversity is a numbers game, and whilst you can mandate your way to diversity, you have to cultivate inclusion, and that we really sort of focused on quite early on. Because inclusion is more about the culture that you want to see, the kind of organization that you want to become. So we've been very careful to sort of talk, you know, have a conversation about inclusion from early on. And the strategy has been about bringing more of a culture to life than anything else. In our very specific case as well, what we do for our clients is to operationalize sustainability. So we don't kind of just stop short at, once we've said, you know, this is how your organization can be more sustainable. And by the way, that's a very simplified version of what we do. But we also then go and help organizations to implement and to make sure that that sustainability strategy is workable, is implementable. And that model of thinking through that issue and helping to put things in place and mechanisms and measures to make it work, we applied to DE&I as well. So we've thought about, how do we operationalize this? How do we actually bring it to life? And I, you know, that's a strong recommendation I would make for other people perhaps listening to this, is to think through, you know, it's not just having the big DE&I idea, it's then thinking about how to make that actionable and bring that to life in your organization. And one way of going back to the global challenge and how we address that is that we've actually put in place an operational framework. We've now got DE&I leaders within each of our regions that work closely with our regional management teams to help them think about what needs to be done and to, you know, get on with some of the doing.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. What do you think is something that some of the DEI leaders aren't talking enough about when it comes to DEI?
Oh, good question. How hard it is, maybe. You know, that there's a lot out there that tells us what good looks like, how it should be, and you know, lots of different models that are very helpful. But I don't know that we talk enough about just frankly how difficult it is, you know, to get it right and to put things in place and to action everything that we know is the right thing to do. I mean, that's definitely one thing that I would say. But I guess also just thinking about how are we working DE&I into overall sort of business or organization strategy. I don't know that we have that conversation enough. And that's not one size fits all by any means, because, you know, each organization has its own strategy. But I don't think that I see that out there enough in terms of good examples of how an organization has done that. You know, here's how we connected the dots and sort of demonstrated where DE&I fits into the organization from a strategic perspective.
Do you think it's because not a lot of organizations have got it integrated into kind of, they've not really thought about it yet? Is that why you feel that they're not speaking about it? Possibly,
or we haven't really connected the dots very well ourselves. I mean, one of the things that we've observed over the years is that, you know, we've put in an awful lot of effort, and we've actually come a really long way. But I'm not sure that everybody really knows that, you know, initiative X or Y is coming from a DE&I place, or indeed that it actually connects to, point A or point B of the strategy. I just don't know that we've really sort of done a great job of connecting it all up. So it's just stepping back from it, I think, often, and saying, okay, yes, actually, organizations moving in this direction, and this is how DE&I has helped us to get there.
Yeah. Have you got an idea of how we can solve that problem? It's probably
well, it is just taking the time to do it. I think, quite honestly, it goes back to that whole storytelling piece as well, right? It's seizing those opportunities where you can get your stakeholders to understand this came from a place of intersection between strategy and DE&I. So if I take what we did last year, we did a review of our parental leave policies around the world, and what we wanted was to make sure that we had a global minimum provision. So no matter where you were in the world within ERM, you could guarantee that you would get the same sort of basic provision as anywhere else in the world. Obviously, if different countries go beyond that minimum, then that would apply, but there's just some consistency. And that's also in terms of who that policy applies to, because not all families are the same. So you've got adoptive families, you have same-sex families, there's lots of different considerations there. And so that policy was aimed at making it equal and open for all. And I think it could be sort of tempting to see that as a people-based initiative, that it was, benefits initiative, but in our case, it really wasn't. It was coming from a DE&I place. But then linking back to the strategy, we've obviously, in a competitive talent market, we need to put things in place that attract the best people and make it really hard for those that are here to want to say goodbye to us. So, giving people reasons to stay versus reasons to leave, that's an organizational priority. So again, I think it's really easy to make those connections and join up those dots, but it just takes the time and the effort to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Thanks so much for sharing that, Neil. What's one of the projects that you're working on now that you're most excited about?
Oh, there's a lot in the hopper at the moment. I'll talk about two. One is we're really sort of getting our supplier diversity approach off the ground. It's not something that we've been particularly strong at, and going back to the benchmarks that we use to help us measure our maturity, it's still one of our lowest scoring categories. So I'm really pleased that we're getting something off the ground there. At the moment, we're just trying to understand the diversity that exists within the supplier base that we use and work with. But then from there, we'll be able to start setting targets and really putting things in place that drive our performance in that space. So that's really exciting, because it's been a long time in the making. And then the other one would be around inclusive leadership. So the theme of our plan this year is inclusion every day, because whilst we've put a lot of the sort of the foundational pieces in place, and like I said before, we've come a pretty long way over the past several years, we just want to make sure that every single day our people are feeling included. They're feeling that sense of belonging. They're seeing the behaviors and the actions that show that we mean what we say when we say we're an inclusive organization. And so we just want to equip and enable and enhance the capability across our leaders within the organization. So we're looking at a sort of a capacity building approach there, which I think will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think from speaking to leaders like yourself and throughout the year, I feel like there's a lot of initiatives that everyone's been putting in place to reach this goal. And I feel like now we're kind of getting into the point or the stage really where's the results? Like, can we actually see the action? Like, does it actually feel as though that the workplace is being more inclusive? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think
I do.
I totally agree. I think it's important to actually,
Yep.
It's like the sustainability element of it. I think we really need to make sure that like not everyone's just talking the talk, like we're actually walking it, and there's action and people feel like a difference is being made.
Yep.
So that sounds great. That it's exciting. It does definitely sound really exciting, and I wish you all the best for that because I think
Thank
it's
you. No, I'm looking
important.
forward to it for sure. Yeah.
Oh, great. I mean, Neil, I've had so much fun speaking with you today. I think that you've given us some really great information to our listeners, and it's really interesting and great to hear the great stuff that you're doing at ERM. I would just like to thank you again for coming on the show. Just before you leave us, what's your parting piece of advice that you would give to aspiring DEI leaders?
Oh, golly, I suppose it would be part of what I've said already in terms of, making that connection to strategy. I think that's a really important next step for us as we move our organizations through their DE&I journey. And getting connected to data. I think being really data driven sets you up to have a different kind of conversation. The numbers don't lie. The data is the data, and it's really hard to argue with data. So whilst you might go back to those setbacks and those knockbacks I was talking about earlier, you might have more of those. I think if it's more like a gut recommendation that you're making, it just feels like the right thing to do. If you're having a conversation that's saying, look, here's where we are, this is what the numbers are showing. I feel like that's really hard to argue with. So starting there as early as possible is probably not a bad shout.
Yeah, definitely. Great advice. Thanks again, Neil. And how can our listeners connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn mostly, I would say. I dabble with Twitter. I am there every now and again, but you can find me on LinkedIn. If you can't find me just with a Neil Griffiths search, I think the handle is NEGRIFF.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I will be linking your profile below this episode. So anyone
Perfect.
listening, if you want to connect with Neil, just click on the link below and you'll definitely be able to connect with him and follow the great stuff that he's doing at ERM. Once again, thanks again, Neil, for speaking with me. And I wish you all the best in the work that you've got with ERM.
Thanks for having me.